I'm Annalise Vance, 82 years old, a woman who believed the foundations of her life were built on solid ground. And my son disowned his own child over a lie, so I sold the house I gave him to save my grandson. For most of my 82 years, my world was a small, predictable, and deeply cherished thing. It was the scent of rose bushes in my garden, the warmth of the morning sun on the worn oak floors of the house my late husband, Robert, and I built with our own hands, and the sound of my grandson's laughter echoing through rooms that held a lifetime of memories. My life was a quiet symphony of routine and love, and at its heart was Leo. My grandson Leo was more like a son to me than a grandson. From the moment he was born, there was a bond between us that felt ancient and unbreakable. My own son Richard and his wife Cynthia were always busy. Busy climbing social ladders, busy acquiring things, busy curating a life that looked perfect from the outside. In their pursuit of appearances, they often missed the substance of their own son's life. It was I who took Leo to his first day of school, I who taught him how to ride a bicycle in the park across the street, and I who sat with him for hours, helping him build elaborate worlds out of Lego bricks on my living room floor. He had my husband's kind eyes and my quiet determination. He was the best of us. Richard and Cynthia provided for him financially, of course. They ensured he had the best clothes, the newest gadgets, the most expensive education. But they were curators of his life, not participants in it. I remember his 10th birthday vividly. They threw him a lavish party at some sterile, rented-out event space. It was catered, there was a magician, and dozens of children from his private school ran around, high on sugar and excitement. Richard and Cynthia stood off to the side, smiling for photos, looking every bit the proud, successful parents. But I saw Leo standing alone for a moment by the towering cake, his eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't looking for the magician or another piece of cake. He was looking for a familiar, loving face to share the moment with. I walked over and squeezed his hand, and the smile he gave me then was worth more than the entire, extravagant affair. Later that evening, after the party guests had gone, he came to my house. He didn't want to stay in his own large, empty-feeling home. We ate leftover sandwiches from my fridge and watched an old black-and-white movie. That was the real celebration. This pattern of prioritizing appearances over people became a defining characteristic of my son's family. A few years ago, Richard and Cynthia celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. They flew to Paris, a trip they documented with a blizzard of glossy photos on social media. They spared no expense. 2 weeks later, it was my 80th birthday. They called, of course, a perfunctory 5-minute conversation full of cheerful, empty phrases. They sent an enormous, ostentatious bouquet of flowers that must have cost a fortune but felt as impersonal as a corporate gift basket. They didn't visit. They were recovering from jet lag, they said. Leo, who was away at his first year of college, took a 12-hour bus ride just to spend the weekend with me. He brought a small, slightly lopsided cake he'd baked himself in his dorm's communal kitchen. We sat at my small kitchen table and talked for hours. He was present. He was there. That was the difference. The most telling incident, perhaps, happened when my late husband Robert passed away. The house Richard and Cynthia lived in, a sprawling modern structure in a gated community, was a property Robert and I had bought for them. We paid the mortgage off as a gift, a foundation for their future. We never thought to question their gratitude or their character. At the reading of Robert's will, it was revealed that our own home, my home, was left entirely to me, and upon my passing it was to be held in a trust for Leo. Richard's face was a mask of cold fury. He and Cynthia cornered me after the lawyer had left. Dad always favored him, Richard said, his voice tight. It's insulting, Mother. That house, this land, it's prime real estate. To give it to a boy who hasn't earned a thing in his life. Cynthia added, we just feel it should be a family decision, Annalise. It's about protecting the family's assets. They weren't talking about a home, they were talking about a portfolio. They saw my life, my memories, and Leo's future as line items on a balance sheet. I stood my ground, telling them Robert's wishes were to be respected, and the chill that settled between us that day never truly left. I simply didn't realize how deep the frost had penetrated, or how easily their love could be shattered by the slightest threat to their pristine, carefully constructed world. The day the world tilted on its axis began like any other Tuesday. The late summer air was warm and I was in my garden, my hands deep in the familiar soil, tending to the last of the season's roses. The scent of damp earth and fragrant petals was a comforting constant in my life. The phone rang from inside the house, its shrill summons a disruption to the peace. I wiped my hands on my apron, went inside, and picked up the receiver. It was Richard. His tone was clipped, urgent, and devoid of any warmth. "Mother, are you sitting down?" he asked without preamble. "I am now," I said, lowering myself into the armchair by the phone. "Richard, what's wrong? You sound dreadful." "It's Leo," he said, and my heart seized. "There's a situation. A girl, Jenna Miller, you remember the Millers from the club, she's claiming Leo got her pregnant." The words hung in the air, grotesque and unbelievable. Jenna Miller. I vaguely recalled a sullen-faced teenager who was the granddaughter of an old acquaintance, someone Richard and Cynthia socialized with. I had met her once or twice at functions they had dragged me to. She had a restless, hungry look in her eyes that I had found unsettling. "Pregnant?" I repeated, my voice a whisper. "Richard, that's impossible, that's absurd. Leo wouldn't, he's not careless, and that girl—" "Mother, please," Richard cut in, his voice sharp with irritation. "This isn't the time for your naive defense of him. The girl is hysterical. Her family is talking about lawyers. This is a disaster. Our name will be dragged through the mud." Our name, not his son, not the boy's heart or his future. He spoke of the family name as if it were a fragile piece of crystal that might be shattered by a scandal. "Have you spoken to Leo?" I asked, a cold dread creeping into my veins. "What does he say?" "Of course we've spoken to him. He denies it, naturally. What else would he do?" The dismissiveness in his voice was like a slap. "Cynthia is beside herself. We have a reputation to maintain. We have to handle this and handle it quickly." "Handle it how, Richard? By believing a baseless accusation against your own son?" My voice was rising, trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "By containing the damage," he nearly shouted. "The Millers are an influential family. We can't afford a public feud. We've told Leo he needs to take responsibility." "Take responsibility for something he didn't do?" I was incredulous. "What are you saying?" There was a pause, and I could hear Cynthia's sharp, prodding voice in the background. Then Richard came back on the line, his voice colder than before. "We're going to make this go away. We'll offer them a settlement. In the meantime, Leo needs to show some remorse. He needs to accept the situation." "You are going to destroy your son," I said, my voice flat and heavy. "You are going to abandon him." "We are trying to protect this family," he retorted. "Something you seem incapable of understanding. We're coming over tomorrow to discuss this, and we expect you to be on our side." He hung up before I could reply. I sat there in the sudden silence of my house, the receiver still pressed to my ear. The sunlight filtering through the window seemed dimmer, the familiar room suddenly alien. I slowly placed the phone back in its cradle and wrapped my arms around myself, a sudden chill racking my body despite the summer warmth. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Leo. His voice was broken, a ragged thread of sound I barely recognized. "Grandma," he choked out, "you believe me, right? You have to believe me." "Oh, Leo," I breathed, my heart aching for him. "Of course I believe you, every word, tell me everything." He told me the story, his words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and confusion. He had known Jenna casually through mutual friends. They had been at the same party a few months ago. He'd had a couple of beers, but he was clear-headed. He said she was very forward, following him around, but he wasn't interested. He had left the party early and alone. He swore on his life that nothing had ever happened between them. He had been completely blindsided. His parents had called him into their sterile, white living room, and before he could even process the accusation, they had pronounced him guilty. They hadn't asked for his side of the story, they had presented him with their version of the facts. "Dad said I was an embarrassment," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. "He said I had thrown my future away and disgraced the family name. Mom just stood there, nodding. They said I needed to admit it and they would manage the fallout. Grandma, they didn't even listen." "I know, my dear," I said softly, tears welling in my eyes. "I know, you listen to me now, Leo. You are not an embarrassment. You are a good, honest young man, and I am proud of you. We will face this together. Do you hear me? Together." "I don't know what to do," he sobbed. "They want me to lie. They want me to say I did it." "You will do no such thing," I said, a fierce, protective anger rising within me, burning away the cold dread. "You will not sacrifice your integrity for their reputation. Let me talk to them. I will make them see reason." But even as I said the words, I knew it was a fool's hope. Reason had no place in their world of calculated appearances and social maneuvering. The storm was no longer gathering, it had broken, and its first victim was my grandson. The next day, Richard and Cynthia arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. They drove up in their gleaming silver sedan, a car that always looked out of place parked in front of my modest, ivy-covered home. They walked up the stone path not as a son and daughter-in-law coming to visit, but as a delegation arriving for a hostile negotiation. Richard wore a severe suit, Cynthia a tailored dress that looked as unforgiving as her expression. I had spent the morning baking, filling the house with the comforting aroma of cinnamon and apples, a desperate, instinctual attempt to impose a sense of normalcy on a world gone mad. I met them at the door and led them into the living room. They refused my offer of coffee or cake, seating themselves rigidly on the edges of the sofa, as if my furniture might contaminate them. "Mother," Richard began, his voice leaving no room for pleasantries, "we need to be clear. This situation with Leo and the Miller girl is escalating. Her father called me this morning. They are prepared to go public. They are filing a lawsuit." "A lawsuit based on a lie," I stated calmly, my hands clasped in my lap to still their trembling. Cynthia scoffed, a small, sharp sound of derision. "Analyze, you must be realistic. It doesn't matter if it's a lie, it matters what people believe. A he said, she said situation is messy and the boy always looks guilty. Always, our friends, our colleagues, this will be a permanent stain." "He is not the boy, Cynthia. He is your son. He is my grandson," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And his integrity is more important than the opinions of your fair-weather friends." "Integrity doesn't pay for a top-tier university or keep your name off the gossip pages," Richard snapped, his composure cracking. "He has been reckless and irresponsible, and he has put everything we have worked for at risk, everything." "What he has put at risk," I countered, leaning forward, "is your perfectly curated image. That is what this is about. You are not afraid for Leo, you are afraid for yourselves." "This is our final word on the matter," Richard said, standing up and looming over me. He had my husband's height but none of his gentle strength. "Leo will issue a formal apology to the Miller family. He will admit paternity. We will set up a private financial arrangement to handle the consequences. This will all be done quietly through lawyers. In return, the Millers will sign a non-disclosure agreement. It's the only way to contain this." I stared at him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. He was talking about his son's life as if it were a hostile corporate takeover to be managed. He was willing to brand Leo a liar and a deadbeat father for the rest of his days just to avoid a few weeks of uncomfortable conversations at the country club. "And if he refuses to lie?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Richard's eyes were like chips of ice. "Then he is no longer our son. We will cut him off. Completely. No tuition, no allowance, no home to come back to. He will be on his own. We will have no choice but to publicly disavow his actions and, by extension, him." "You would disown him." I was standing now too, facing him down. "You would throw your own child away." "We are preserving the family," Cynthia interjected, her voice smooth as venom. "Sometimes a diseased limb must be cut off to save the body, and that brings us to you, Analyze." She turned her cool gaze on me. "Your blind support for him is making this worse. You are enabling his delusion. If you continue to stand with him against us, then you are making a choice. You can be part of this family, our family, or you can be part of his problem. But you cannot be both. If you shelter him, if you fund his stubbornness, then you will be cut off as well. Consider your position carefully." It was an ultimatum, delivered with the cold precision of an executioner. They were demanding I betray my grandson to prove my loyalty to them. They were asking me to choose between my conscience and my son. In that moment, looking at Richard's unyielding face and Cynthia's smug certainty, I realized there was no choice to be made. They had already left the family. They had abandoned its core principles of love, loyalty, and truth long ago. They had just made it official. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with a quiet, profound rage. Richard looked taken aback. "What did you say?" "I said, get out of my house," I repeated, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. "The home your father and I built, the home where we taught you difference between right and wrong, a lesson it seems you have forgotten. You come into this house and you demand I sacrifice your son for your vanity. You are not welcome here. Not now, not ever, until you remember what it means to be a father." For a moment, they were speechless. Cynthia's face was a mask of shocked indignation. Richard's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again, sputtering. He gave a sharp, angry shake of his head, turned on his heel, and strode out the door. Cynthia followed, pausing only to give me one last look of pure contempt. "You will regret this, Analyze," she hissed. "You have chosen a sinking ship. Don't come to us when it drags you under." Then she was gone. The front door clicked shut, leaving an echoing silence in its wake. I stood in the middle of my living room, the scent of baked apples now seeming like a mockery. The foundation of my life hadn't just been shaken, it had been deliberately dynamited by my own son. I was alone, facing a war I had never wanted, with the person I loved most in the world depending entirely on me. And I had no idea what to do next. The first few days after the ultimatum were a blur of quiet, suffocating grief. The silence in the house was a physical presence. My son didn't call. I knew he wouldn't. The line had been drawn and I was on the wrong side of it. The day after his parents disowned him, Leo arrived on my doorstep with a single suitcase and a backpack. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes hollowed out by sleepless nights and a betrayal so deep it had stolen his youthful spark. He looked like a refugee, cast out from his own life. He tried to be strong for me, unpacking his things in the small guest room that had always been his when he stayed over, pretending as though it were just an extended visit. But at night I would hear him pacing, the soft footfalls a testament to the turmoil in his mind. I would find him in the kitchen in the early hours of the morning, staring out the window at the dark street, the weight of the world on his 20-year-old shoulders. We didn't talk much about Richard and Cynthia. The wound was too raw, the pain too immediate. Instead, we existed in a shared bubble of sorrow. I cooked his favorite meals, things his mother never made, and we would eat in near silence, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us. My isolation was absolute. Friends of Richard and Cynthia, people I had known for years, suddenly stopped returning my calls. A neighbor I used to have coffee with once a week crossed the street to avoid me when she saw me in my garden. The tendrils of my son's influence were long and powerful. A narrative had clearly been spun. I was the eccentric, senile old woman, siding with a delinquent grandson against her sensible, long-suffering son. I was an outcast in my own community. About a week after Leo moved in, the official letter arrived. It was delivered by a courier, a crisp, intimidating envelope addressed to Mr. Leo Vance. My hands trembled as I handed it to him. He sat at the kitchen table and tore it open. It was from a law firm formally notifying him of the lawsuit filed by the Miller family on behalf of their daughter, Jenna. The language was cold, brutal, and legalistic. It listed demands for exorbitant sums for emotional distress, medical expenses, both current and future, and punitive damages. It was a declaration of war printed on expensive letterhead. I watched as the last bit of color drained from Leo's face. He dropped the letter on the table as if it had burned him. "They're actually doing it," he whispered, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Grandma, what are we going to do? I don't have any money. I have nothing." "We," I said, my voice firmer than I felt, "are going to fight this. This is not the end, Leo. This is the beginning of us proving the truth." But my brave words felt hollow even to my own ears. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my darkened living room, the legal papers on the coffee table before me. The numbers swam before my eyes. They were astronomical, designed to intimidate, to force a settlement. My pension was modest. I had my savings, a nest egg Robert and I had carefully built, but it was meant for my old age, for emergencies. It was not enough to fight a prolonged legal battle against a wealthy family and their high-priced lawyers. Despair began to creep in, a cold, insidious fog. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my 82 years. I felt old, tired, and terrifyingly alone. I looked at the photograph of my late husband on the mantelpiece. "Oh, Robert," I whispered to the empty room, "what would you do?" His smiling face offered no answers, but thinking of him sparked a memory. He had always been the fighter, the strategist. But he never fought alone. He always had his best friend, his confidant, his lawyer, Arthur Croft. Arthur, I hadn't spoken to him in years. Not since Robert's funeral. He was semi-retired now, living a quiet life a few towns over. Would he even remember me? Would he be willing to get involved in such a sordid, ugly family drama? The thought of calling him, of laying bare my family's shame, was humiliating. But the alternative, letting Leo be consumed by this lie, was unthinkable. As the first light of dawn began to gray the sky, a flicker of resolve ignited within me. I would not let Cynthia's prophecy come true. This ship was not going to sink, not while I was still the captain. Summoning my courage, I found Arthur Croft's number in my old address book. His voice on the other end of the line was gravelly, older but unmistakable. He sounded surprised but not displeased to hear from me. I explained the situation, my voice faltering as I recounted the ugly details of the accusation and my son's betrayal. I expected skepticism, perhaps even a polite refusal. Instead, there was a long silence. "The boy Leo," Arthur finally said. "He's a good kid, isn't he? I remember Robert talking about him, said he was the one who got the best of the family's character." Tears pricked my eyes. "He is, Arthur. He's the very best of us." "And Richard is siding with the accusers?" Arthur asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "He's siding with his own vanity," I corrected softly. "He disowned his son to avoid a scandal." There was another pause, this time shorter, followed by a sigh. "Some things don't change. Robert always said Richard had a spine made of gelatin when it came to social pressure. All right, analyze. I'm mostly retired, but I'm not dead. Let me see the paperwork. I'll take a look, for Robert's sake and for the boys." A wave of relief so profound it left me lightheaded washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. That afternoon, I drove to Arthur's small, book-cluttered office. He was older, his hair completely white, but his eyes were as sharp and intelligent as I remembered. He listened patiently as I recounted the story again, and he read the legal letter from the Millers with a grim expression. "This is a shakedown, pure and simple," he said, tapping the papers. "The numbers are designed to scare you into submission. They're betting you won't fight. They're betting the boy will be too ashamed and his family too eager to make it go away." "His family is," I said bitterly. "But you're not," he finished, a small, approving smile touching his lips. "Good loyalty, Robert would have liked that. Now the truth is our only weapon. We need to find a crack in this girl's story, anything that proves she's lying." The legal fees were a significant concern. Arthur, true to his friendship with Robert, offered a reduced rate, but the costs of depositions, investigations, and court filings would still be substantial. My savings would be depleted quickly. That night back at home, I was in the attic, searching for old financial documents, bank statements, anything that might help me budget for the fight ahead. The attic was a repository of my life, filled with dusty boxes of photographs, old letters, and Robert's meticulously organized files. I was pulling out a heavy file box labeled Household Deeds and Titles when my hand brushed against a thick, vellum-like folder tucked away at the very back. Curious, I pulled it out. The label, written in Robert's neat, strong hand, read, 14 Willow Creek Drive Deed. 14 Willow Creek Drive. It was the address of the house where Richard and Cynthia lived. I opened the folder. Inside was the original official deed to their property, and the registered owner, clear as day, was listed as Annalise Vance and Robert Vance. I sank down onto a dusty old trunk, my heart pounding. I remembered it now. We had bought the house outright for them when they got married, a grand gesture of parental support. We had intended to formally transfer the title into their names, but there had been some legal complication, some tax issue that had delayed it. Then life had gotten in the way and it was simply forgotten. For over 30 years, Richard and Cynthia had lived in a house that legally still belonged to me. I sat there in the dusty, quiet attic, the deed in my hands. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like power. It was leverage. It was security. It was a weapon I never knew I had. My son had disowned his child and cast me out to protect his assets and his lifestyle. And all along, his biggest asset, the very roof over his head, had been resting in my hands. A slow, cold anger began to burn alongside the hope Arthur had given me. Cynthia's words came back to me. "You have chosen a sinking ship." She was wrong. I wasn't on a sinking ship. I was the harbor. I was the one with the solid ground beneath my feet. I went downstairs and called Arthur, my voice steady and clear. "Arthur," I said, "I think I've found a way to fund this defense, and it's going to come from a unexpected place." Arthur Croft, armed with a renewed sense of purpose and a secure retainer, became a force of nature. He was a methodical, old-school lawyer who believed that lies, no matter how well constructed, always had a fatal flaw. He hired a private investigator, a discreet woman who began to quietly piece together Jenna Miller's life. Meanwhile, I did my own, less formal investigation. I remembered that Jenna's grandmother, a woman I'd occasionally played bridge with years ago, was an incorrigible gossip. I arranged to run into her at the local market. Over tea, feigning simple, grandmotherly concern, I listened. I heard all about Jenna's struggles, her failed attempts at community college, and most tellingly, her recent, turbulent relationship with a young man from a neighboring town, a boy with a motorcycle and a bad reputation. The pieces began to fall into place. The investigator discovered that Jenna had been in significant credit card debt. She had been bragging to friends about a big payday coming her way. Arthur's legal motions forced the Millers to provide specific dates for the alleged encounters with Leo. That's when we found the crack. The The primary date Jenna provided, the night she claimed the conception occurred, was the night of a large, local music festival. Leo had been there, true, but so had hundreds of other people. The true breakthrough came from the most modern of sources. Leo, scrolling idly through social media one evening, let out a sudden gasp. He had stumbled upon a public photo album from the festival posted by a mutual acquaintance. And there, in the background of a blurry group shot, was Jenna Miller. She wasn't with Leo. Her arms were wrapped tightly around the neck of the motorcycle-riding boyfriend her grandmother had mentioned. The photo was time-stamped. It was taken at the exact time she claimed to have been with Leo on the other side of the festival grounds. It was the linchpin, the irrefutable proof. Arthur decided against a long, drawn-out trial. He wanted to break them quickly and decisively. He filed a motion for an immediate deposition, a formal, recorded interview under oath. He wanted to confront Jenna with the evidence before she had time to invent a new story. The day of the deposition felt like a scene from a movie. We convened in a sterile conference room in a downtown law office. The air was thick with tension. I sat next to Leo, my hand resting reassuringly on his arm. Across the long, polished table sat Jenna, flanked by her parents and their smug, expensive lawyer. At the far end of the table, sitting apart, were Richard and Cynthia. They wouldn't look at me or their son. They were there as interested parties, their expressions a mixture of anxiety and grim determination to see this through. Arthur began calmly, his voice gentle as he asked Jenna to recount her story. She did so with a practiced, tearful performance, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. She described her supposed affection for Leo, her confusion, her pain. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a flicker of what might have been pity on his face. Cynthia, however, watched Jenna with an approving nod as if she were a prized student. Then Arthur's demeanor changed. He stopped being the kindly old man and became the sharp-witted prosecutor. He began to pick apart her timeline, pointing out small inconsistencies. Jenna's composure began to fray. Her answers became clipped and defensive. "Miss Miller," Arthur said, his voice dropping, "you stated you were with Mr. Vance behind the main stage between 10 and 11 p.m. on the night of August 12th. You are certain of this?" "Yes," she snapped. "I remember it perfectly." "That's excellent," Arthur said smoothly, "because memory is so important in these matters." He then produced a large, glossy print of the photograph Leo had found. He placed it in the center of the table. "Can you identify the young woman in this photograph?" Jenna stared at the picture. The color drained from her face. Her lawyer snatched it up, his eyes widening as he saw the time stamp. That could be anyone," Jenna stammered. "It's blurry." "Is it?" Arthur asked. He produced another digitally enhanced close-up. There was no mistaking her face or the face of the young man she was clinging to. "Our investigator spoke with this young man, Miss Miller. He was quite forthcoming. He even showed us the text messages you sent him the next day, talking about what a wonderful time you had together at the festival. Shall I read them for the record?" Jenna's facade shattered. A choked sob escaped her lips. Her father stood up abruptly, shouting, "This is harassment." Arthur ignored him, his gaze locked on Jenna. "The credit card statements showing your purchase of a home pregnancy test 2 weeks before the festival are also quite interesting. As is the fact that the test was negative. This wasn't about a baby, was it, Miss Miller? It was. Never about Leo. It was about money. It was a desperate, malicious lie to extort money from a family you thought would be too ashamed to fight back." Jenna broke down completely, her tearful performance replaced by genuine, panicked sobs. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she cried. "I was in trouble, I just needed money." The room was silent, save for her wails. The truth, ugly and raw, was finally out. The miller's lawyer, pale and shaken, quickly declared the deposition over and announced their intention to withdraw the lawsuit immediately. I looked across the table at my son, Richard. He was staring at his hands, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Cynthia was frozen, her mouth slightly agape, the look of utter humiliation stark on her perfectly made-up face. They hadn't just been wrong, they had been willing accomplices to a fraud. They had thrown their son to the wolves for nothing. The aftermath of the deposition was a quiet implosion. The Miller family, facing a potential countersuit for fraud and defamation, disappeared from public view. Jenna's life was irrevocably altered by the public nature of her lie, but my focus was not on them, it was on the wreckage of my own family. That evening, Richard and Cynthia appeared at my door. They looked diminished, stripped of their usual arrogance. There was no gleaming sedan this time. They had come in a taxi, as if their own car was too proud to make the journey. I let them in but did not invite them to sit. They stood awkwardly in my entryway. "Mother," Richard began, his voice hoarse. We were wrong. We are so sorry. We made a terrible mistake." "We were misled," Cynthia added quickly, trying to salvage some dignity. "That girl was very convincing. We were only trying to protect the family." "You were not misled," I said, my voice cold and even. "You were not protecting the family. You chose the path of least resistance. You chose your reputation over your son. That wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. You showed us exactly who you are, and I believe you." "Analyze, please," Cynthia pleaded, her eyes welling with what I suspected were tears of self-pity. "He's our son, we love him." "Do you?" I asked, looking directly at Richard. "Love doesn't issue ultimatums. Love doesn't demand a person sacrifice their honor for your comfort. Love doesn't disown. You don't know the first thing about love, Richard. You know about ownership, you know about appearances, but love, no, you have no idea." I told them that while I wouldn't stop them from trying to earn back Leo's forgiveness, that was his choice to make. My own relationship with them was fundamentally, irreparably broken. The trust was gone. "What are you saying, Mother?" Richard asked, his voice small. "I am saying that this house," I gestured around the entryway, "is a house of loyalty and truth. You are welcome here only when you embody those principles, and I am afraid you have a very long way to go." I closed the door on their stunned faces. It was not an act of anger but of finality. I was no longer their mother in the way I had been. I was now, first and foremost, Leo's guardian. The next day, I called a real estate agent. A week later, a for sale sign was hammered into the manicured lawn of 14 Willow Creek Drive. The news hit Richard and Cynthia like a thunderbolt. Richard called, sputtering with rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. This is our home," he yelled into the phone. "No, Richard," I replied calmly. "It was never your home. It was my property which I graciously allowed you to live in. A privilege you took for a right. The proceeds from this sale will be put into a trust for Leo's education and his future, a future you were so willing to throw away. You are both successful professionals. You will land on your feet." The sale was quick. The house in its desirable neighborhood was snapped up for a handsome price. It was a strange, liberating feeling. I had severed the final financial tie that bound me to my son's toxic world. I had taken the very foundation of his false life and used it to build a true one for my grandson. With the lawsuit dropped and his name cleared, the light began to return to Leo's eyes. The money from the sale meant he could finish college without worry. More than that, it was a tangible symbol of my faith in him. We found him a small apartment near his campus, and I helped him move in. As we unpacked his boxes, he stopped and looked at me, his expression full of an emotion that needed no words. "You saved me, Grandma," he said, his voice thick. "You saved my life." "No, Leo," I replied, taking his face in my hands. "We saved each other. You reminded me what is worth fighting for." Our family is smaller now, but it is stronger. It is built not on a shared name or a shared history, but on a shared, unbreakable bond of love and loyalty. Richard and Cynthia occasionally send stilted, formal emails. Leo responds politely, but keeps his distance. The wound is too deep, the scar too prominent. He is building his own life now on his own terms, a life of substance, not of show. As for me, my days are quiet again. The roses in my garden continue to bloom. The sun still warms the oak floors of my home, but something within me has changed. I learned that a person's true character is not revealed in times of comfort, but in moments of crisis. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is to let go of the child who has lost their way in order to save the one who has not. And I learned that an 82-year-old woman with truth on her side is the most powerful force in the world. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a lie. It was about the truth that the lie revealed. It showed me that the family you choose, the family that stands by you when the storms come, is more real than the one you are simply born into. I lost a son, but I solidified my bond with a grandson, and I found a strength in myself I never knew I possessed. The house was just wood and nails, but loyalty, that's a foundation that can never be sold. And that's my story. Thank you for listening.